Right, this is Luke McBain. I'm here with my brother. We're talking about Bitcoin, and it's great to be back. Thanks, Chad, for your time and insights into Bitcoin. Uh,
You're
in the
welcome.
pre in the previous session, we talked a little bit about very abstract stuff, so regulation and what is the SEC doing, what's China doing, and I guess for your average, let's say average person, right, who has a 9 to 5 job and finds Bitcoin interesting because he or she just wants to make sure that their savings are protected somehow and from inflation and says, okay, here's something for my old age. Maybe for those people, they just don't have the time to look into this stuff, right? And we were talking about, well, what has happened in the last couple of years? What's different now than the last time we talked about Bitcoin and there was this huge hype? Um, and I've been also talking to people who do have some, strange enough, do some, like I just mentioned that in passing, like small talk. And first of all, it's interesting that I meet a lot of people who have some knowledge of Bitcoin. I think
Hmm.
more than they used there. It seems to be more people just, who have thought about it or looked into it. But and at the same time, so that surprises me that you're able to like engage in a conversation that they know what it is. And some of them even have invested into Bitcoin. But on the other hand, they are, let me say, not really committed. And I found this puzzling because I thought, well, anybody who's looked at this must be fascinated, just like I am, which of course doesn't have to be the case. Everybody's fascinated by other stuff, but I was just very quickly, yeah, mesmerized by the potential of Bitcoin. I think it's unparalleled in the whole world. And I was surprised by people just, more or less also dismissing it and saying, oh, yeah, yeah, I know what it is, but I'm not going to invest in it. And I wonder what the message is for, let's say, just your average person. What do they need to know about Bitcoin to make that something important for them?
Well, I would say this, and I tell this to everybody that I talk to if it comes up in conversation. And it does come up maybe more today than it did a few years ago, but it doesn't come up in everyday conversation. But what I always tell people is um, they need to do their own research. And I think this is where a lot of people fall down, whether they buy Bitcoin, invest in Bitcoin or not. As you mentioned, some people that do own it don't really understand. I think they look at it as, oh, well, maybe I can make some money, which to me is the wrong mindset. I think if once you do some research in Bitcoin and study a little bit, you'll realize that you don't view what we call the dollar. Now, if you're in Europe, excuse me, obviously there's different representations of that. I'm in Canada, so we have a dollar. The U.S. obviously has a dollar. Excuse me. Um, but what I would say is, it doesn't matter where you live in the world. 99% of every country's currencies are actually backed in some way, shape, or form by the U.S. dollar because it's the reserve currency of the world. So um, I think when people think about, not everybody, but when some people that might even own Bitcoin might say, "Oh, well, yeah, but it's more of a speculative thing where they're hoping to make more dollars." But I think once you do some research, do some reading, watch maybe a few videos, I don't know, what you'll probably come to the conclusion is you actually want more dollars to buy Bitcoin because dollars are something that continually erode in value and Bitcoin doesn't. So let's say that Bitcoin doesn't go up ever again. It will still maintain its value because of its fixed supply. Whereas every other currency in the world, which is underlyingly backed by the US dollar as a reserve currency, will always lose value. There's no government or royal issued currency that's ever existed that didn't lose value because every government or monarchy or dictatorship always prints more of it than the public needs, so that they can fund infrastructure, wars, you name it. So this always hurts the regular person. So I would encourage people to. There's a book out that I read a few years ago. It's still a fabulous book called The Bitcoin Standard. I did not write it. I get no royalties from promoting it. Um, but it really helped me understand why why the world probably needs Bitcoin and individual people do. There's that same author issued one last year called the Fiat Standard, which probably explains more about what's really going on in the global economy, about um, one's dollars and why they don't hold value, and why you think everybody thinks everything, doesn't matter where you live in the world, keeps going up in price. There's a there's a reasonable argument to suggest it's not going up nearly as much in price as people think. Just the value of their currency is going down. And so when you start to see the world from that perspective, you start to realize why you actually need Bitcoin. Um, so I would never tell anybody, oh, buy Bitcoin because it's a great investment, or you can make money or whatever. I would say read, watch some videos, talk to people that actually understand, and learn for yourself, and then decide if it's something that you want to participate in.
But
But the
I mean,
one thing that sorry?
yeah, I mean, for me personally, the unique selling proposition of Bitcoin was that it's the only limited asset in the world right now. Like this is the only uh, yeah, asset, currency, whatever you want to call it, there's not going to be more of. So it's immediately when I understood that part, I got interested. I said, I want some of
Right.
that. I want some of
Yeah.
that because there's just not more of it. There's a limited supply, 21 million Bitcoin, and I want some of that. It doesn't matter if it's a small part, because that immediately had that scarcity aspect to it, which traditionally gold had. Like, why are people interested in gold? Because it's scarce. But people don't realize that you always find more gold. So we don't know exactly
That,
how much gold there is, but we know how much gold, how much Bitcoin there will be in perpetuity, basically. And
right.
so I thought that's mind blowing. So I need to have some of that. That's a no brainer. And the second part, that it's the only digital asset which is decentralized, and there's not a single nexus of control. And when I realized that part, so those two factors, I said I need to be in. And because it's just, it doesn't compare to anything else in the world as an asset. So, and I thought that people would realize that part, but when I talk to people, I think it's not that deeply. As you said, for them, it's more something, it's one of those digital currencies. It's another thing where you can make an investment and maybe, maybe double your money or something like that and speculate. But it's not that. It's not that what is interesting about
No,
it. Not at all. So,
no.
yeah.
I think I think the aspect, for instance, you made a great point about gold. Gold is scarce, and therefore it has an intrinsic value. That it is scarce. It is used a little bit in things, obviously jewelry, but it might be used in a few other things. But the real value to gold is the fact that it's in limited supply. The problem that gold always has had and always will have is it's not finite supply. It's not fixed. It's just limited. So the higher the gold price is, the more we mine, we find more gold, and the price of gold doesn't go up nearly as much as maybe it should, because there is no final supply of gold. Like you said, we don't know how much gold there is. And we actually know for a fact that gold exists in other parts of our solar system as well, and meteors and things. So as technology grows, we could actually, in theory, mine gold in other parts of the solar system at some point in the next, 1 to 500 years, if we need it. So gold is good. Gold has been great for us for thousands of years, but we are now in a digital world, and that's not going back. We're not going backwards, and we're not going to be staying static. We're going to be continuing to do more and more in the digital realm. And so I know gold people, well, some gold people don't like this, but Bitcoin is really the digital equivalent of gold. But it's actually better because It has a fixed supply. It's not scarce, it's fixed. So that's the end of it. Like there's no more mining more Bitcoin. And I know skeptics will say, oh, well, you can do this with code. But that has been disproven. Bitcoin's been around for 15, 16 years. The smartest computers and hackers in the world have not been able to duplicate it. So let's just get that off the table right now. If that could have been done, it would have been done many years ago. So Bitcoin has a fixed supply. So therefore, it's becoming more and more scarce. 92% of all Bitcoin has now been mined. So the rest is 8%, and it's going to take over 100 years to get the rest of it. So that's why we see the Bitcoin over time continue to gain in value with wild fluctuations for sure, but always continue to gain. So I think that is a good reason for people to invest in it. But there's another aspect, which is the currency aspect, and that is it's portable. Moving, people say, oh, moving $1 billion in gold is difficult. How about moving $100,000 in? You're moving from Berlin, you've decided to relocate to Mexico or Canada or Florida or whatever. You've got $100,000 in gold. How do you move them? Well, there's a process, and you got to do this and that, and fill out this paperwork and let customs know and get containers and all this other stuff. With Bitcoin, you just get on the plane and go. And when you arrive at your destination, you log into your computer or whatever it is you need, and there it is. It's extremely portable. The other thing you can do is if you say, well, Chad, I'm going to buy this house and I'm going to use Bitcoin. I don't suggest that while Bitcoin continues to be volatile, particularly on the upside. But let's say you did, and you want me to acquire this for you, so you can just send me the $100,000. So you could do that in 3 seconds on your phone. But to send me $100,000 worth of gold, that's a very difficult and an arduous process. And if you want to convert it to cash and then send it to me, that's a process, and paperwork is involved. So we're in a digital world now. Everything happens virtually in seconds, or at the very least minutes. And Bitcoin is the answer to moving gold into the digital realm, right? So that's my long-winded explanation as to why I think more and more people should do some research on it, not only from an investment aspect, but even if you did want to use it for a currency, it is much easier to do transactions locally, nationally, internationally.
So there's a slight contradiction, perhaps, at least in my personal observation, that you can have a conversation now about Bitcoin. There seems to be some understanding of what that is and how to get it, and some people have been dabbling around in it a little bit. Still, probably let's say the fundamental knowledge about what it is, it's still not quite prevalent everywhere, which is not necessarily needed. I mean, not everybody knows everything about the stock market and
No,
certain types of stocks and what they mean, or certain types of products. It just, yeah, as we are now in this phase of inflation, and also that let's say real estate is becoming more inaccessible for people because it's just becoming way too expensive. It just occurs to me that would be a good alternative to, yeah, to build your personal wealth and protect it, and to carry it on into the future, because that's one of the reasons people buy real estate, of course, to live in it, but also to
yeah.
build something for themselves into the future, and of course for their children. And now that sometimes it seems like Bitcoin is now a good alternative, because you don't need $100,000 to invest in it. You can start much smaller. Yeah.
You can start with $5, $10, $5 a week in perpetuity. It's whatever you're comfortable with. And what I would say is, I think that speaks a lot about the world that we live in now, that real estate, which has always been something that we cherish, ownership, property ownership, but it has now gone from something that you took pride in and grew gardens in and raised families in, to it still does all of those things, but and it's an investment. And for the vast majority of people in the world, it's the only thing that actually helps them build wealth anymore. I mean, that's really where we're at, which is another reason why real estate has gotten so expensive over the last 30 or 40 years, because people have figured that out. Doesn't matter about their retirement savings plans and their investment funds and all. At the end of the day, after fees, after inflation, they get to whatever age, 60, 70 years old, and it doesn't matter that much. And yet they look around and they say, oh, well, I own real estate and I have $500,000 in equity in that, or $1 million in equity. Like it's real estate that is the last thing. And that I think speaks to a world where things have gone off the rails with the money. And so if we start, and again, we're not going to go down this too much in the time allotted, but I think everybody can recognize that,
Hmm.
you know, that if you talk to people that have any amount of wealth whatsoever, the vast majority of them own real estate. Do they have stocks? Do they have bonds? Do they have registered retirement savings? Maybe, but most of their wealth, if they have any at all, comes from real estate. So there's something wrong with the money. And what's wrong with the money is it's printed into oblivion, and everybody goes to the store one year and bread is more expensive than it was last year. And same with everything else. And with Bitcoin, it might be the digital version of, oh, another way that we can save our savings, protect our earnings, and hopefully make some money, but at the very least, protect what we have, because we can't even protect what we have anymore. Unless probably you own real estate, you know?
So,
And
so
that's
yeah, so we're like at a point, see, I was just reminded a little bit when, because you compared, or you said, well, it's volatile because it's new, and we are reminded of the time when the internet came up and things didn't, like, people didn't really know what that is, the internet, and there were books written about it. So you first had to read the book before you went online, just even
right.
understand what's going on, to, to how a browser works. And I remember distinctly also being, online, and one of those people using an account from my university. And I remember talking to people about that, and I had like a similar response. Well, not now, like 2, 3 years ago when I talked about Bitcoin, when I said, "Did you try email?" And people were just laughing at me. Like they were just saying, like, who needs that? And what is that? Yeah, I heard about that, but it's sort of like what's going on? And with Bitcoin, I think we're a step further in terms of Bitcoin awareness, but it's still, there is no awareness, but it's not yet the awareness of what you just described in terms of real home ownership. I think in terms of
Right.
home, it's just everybody knows that by now, that it's not just about you having a home, but it's about, yeah, building your personal wealth and security and your future, and that's why you need to have home ownership. That's why it's so important for people. And I think we're not there yet with Bitcoin. But you mentioned something interesting where you made another observation, is how, let's, what did you say? Not how investors talk about it, but like, yeah, how these people who deal with investments and consult on that, how that space is also changing. Like you follow some people and you
Right.
see there's a difference in terms of how they, work with Bitcoin now, or how they talk about it, and how does that change? How has that changed?
Well, I think the fact that we now have, in the U.S., which is, we've had it in Canada for a couple of years, but the U.S., which is probably the most important financial market, public markets in the world, we now have exchange traded funds, exchange traded products. And so you see these big monolithic money managers like a BlackRock or a Fidelity, or some of the other ones. They are now offering this as part of their investment portfolios. So people can invest in Bitcoin much more easily now. They don't have to go out and buy some Bitcoin and store it in a wallet. They can just buy it through an investment contract with any of these big investment houses. So that's changed the game a lot over the last few months for people that just want to invest in the underlying asset. And I think that's a great thing for people that want that. I still think that people should probably buy and own their own Bitcoin, just like their own house. But if you're looking at it from an investment perspective, those are great vehicles to look sorry, to use and to consider. Um, and the fact that these massive organizations wanted to do this, have gotten involved in it, and are now also out there spreading the word and teaching some of their clients about it, helps a lot. The problem with that, though, I see is, again, coming back to the regular person and the house, the regular person doesn't have investments with BlackRock or Fidelity or anything like that. They put their money in the bank and maybe put it into a mutual fund or a retirement fund. And this is why I really encourage people to read the Bitcoin Standard as one book, or the Fiat Standard, or just educate yourself. There's thousands of hours of free videos on YouTube, and understand what's really happening with the money in the money in the world is becoming worth less, not worthless, but worth less every passing year, every passing month. And it's really hurting the average person. You know, if you look at, I said a few minutes ago, almost every wealthy person in the world owns a pretty vast amount of real estate. I'm not saying that's how they made their wealth, but that's where they protect some of their wealth. Bitcoin is another now modern technology that helps you do that as well. And I think actually regular people need it more so than the wealthy by far, because they're the ones out there working 9 to 5, 8 to 4, whatever their hours are. Some of them 2 jobs. They need to protect their earnings, and they need to protect their. And so I really encourage people to do some more research, learn a little bit about it. Don't look at it from a speculative perspective. Look at it as a long-term investment, and I think 5, 10 years from now, you'll be much happier than if you hadn't at least done the research. And if you do the research and you're not interested, so be it. You know.
I think one of the things is then, I mean, some people, as I said, have already, bought Bitcoin, so they know where to buy it. But those who haven't really, dealt with it, then say, well, where do I get it, and what's going on? So they have to go to one of the exchanges and buy it there. And
Yeah. So
yeah, and just as an example now, of course, then what I needed also some time to realize was that these exchanges are basically like private companies, and they're not banks, so they're not regulated like banks, and they're not also protected like banks in terms of certain guarantees which are given by the state. And so once you realize that, you also start to worry and say, well, what's going on with my money on that exchange? And is it secure, and is it safe? And then you always have this in Bitcoin history. You have some of these exchanges just going broke, basically going
yeah,
bankrupt. Recently, we saw that with FTX, just poof, going
30 years
bankrupt.
or so. Yep. Yep.
And you have that probably in every cycle. And that is also something I think when you get into the matter, especially when I then talk to people and explain things to them and say, well, but you have to know, if you get Bitcoin, you get them from the exchange, and you have to know this and that exchanges have gone bankrupt in the past. So maybe
Yeah.
then you get your Bitcoin off the exchange. But if you get it off the exchange, then you have your Bitcoin at home, and then you worry about your Bitcoin at home, like as if you had like gold stored at home. And so it was sort of like, I don't know, if you're somebody who worries a lot and is risk averse, this person might say, oh, come on, just, I
Yeah.
can't deal with that. That's a headache. And I'm just going to do something else. I'm going to, I don't know,
Yeah.
invest in stocks or bonds through my bank, and that's it.
Well, I mean, it's the good news is, I guess, is no bank has ever gone under, so
Oh,
they're
yeah.
much safer.
Yeah.
Sarcasm
Yeah. Yeah.
intended. Nobody woke up in Cyprus 10 years ago and found out that they had no money in the entire system. Last year, we had, what, 3 or 4 U.S. banks, a couple of them large banks, go down. Look, it happens. What I would say, though, and this probably goes back to what we just talked about, is, look, I don't think exchanges are places you should keep your Bitcoin. If that's where you buy your Bitcoin, get it off the exchange. If you're not comfortable with storing it yourself, there are other options out there called multi-sig. It's kind of like a bank, I guess, in the Ethernet. And then getting back to our previous comments, and if all of that just seems like too much, well, that's okay. You know who BlackRock is. You know who Fidelity is. You know who some of these other big ones are. just go to your bank and say, I want to buy into the BlackRock ETF, and your bank can handle that, or your credit union, or whoever it is you use. I mean, that it doesn't get any simpler than that. That's what you'd have to do with pretty much any other type of investment. I still strongly encourage people to own their own Bitcoin and take custody of it. But if you're not willing to put in the time and figure out how to do that safely and properly, then these massive investment institutions have made it very easy for you just to say, here, I trust you. You take care of it. They'll charge you a small fee, but it is a small fee, at least currently. And you can sleep better at night that way. So there's many ways to get into Bitcoin. And some of them are much more traditional now. And some of them may be a little bit foreign to some people. But no, I wouldn't leave my Bitcoin on an exchange if you bought it from an exchange. And if you're going to custody it yourself, you're right. You're going to have to do some reading and watch some videos and figure out how to do that safely. But there are many options out there to help you do that.
I mean, it is easy to do self-custody. It's just something, yeah, I guess you have to be aware of before you take that decision. And it's not that difficult. It's just good to know how that works in the long run. Just like you have to know how does a stock work if I invest in it, what's going on there. Yeah.
So full disclosure, I actually don't do self-custody. I use a multi-sig custodian, which we're not going to get into the technicals of that, but basically because coming from the traditional world of putting your money in the bank and all that kind of stuff, I wanted a third party, at least partially, not responsible, but able to help me if I messed anything up. People will have to do some research into multi-sig, but the company I use, and I don't get anything for saying this, is CASA, C-A-S-A. Google it, look it up, see what they do. But it's a custody solution. I think it's actually maybe even more secure than self-custody. That's my personal belief, because I can make a mistake and screw everything up. And multi-sig or it's much more difficult to do that. But again, we don't have the time to discuss that. But there are personal storage options out there. And again, I come back to, and if none of that is something that you're interested in, then there's investment houses out there that'll look after it for you. Yeah. And I actually just was watching something yesterday. BlackRock, Fidelity, all these big electronic traded funds that are offered as investment vehicles are keeping all of their Bitcoin actually in cold storage. So they are responsible literally for your Bitcoin. And of course, they will be insured up to a certain amount and blah, 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 blah. So for those that are just beginning, maybe that's the way to go. But there's certainly options out there for self-custody as well. Yeah.
I mean, you just mentioned the ETFs and that they were approved this year. Maybe some people who are listening don't really understand what that means and why this is now a game changer, or why this is something new, and why you just mentioned also people can participate and buy them, but why is this now something new for the Bitcoin space, or what is the new thing about that?
Well, I guess, and again, these are U.S. regulations, but that is the financial markets of the world are kind of based out of there. What's new about it is that now offers the ability for anybody to buy Bitcoin or invest in Bitcoin, not have to worry about some of the things that we just discussed about self-custody and stuff like that. They don't actually own the underlying asset, but they have invested in the asset itself. So any gains they would take advantage of. These are important things because these investment vehicles enable, like you said earlier, somebody just wants to invest $5, they can do that. They don't have to learn about doing things on an exchange or whatever. They can just go to their bank and invest. It also opens Bitcoin up to the global capital markets, which is actually what we're seeing now, where there's just billions of dollars every week being poured into these investment vehicles, because legally a lot of investment houses couldn't invest directly in Bitcoin. And we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but basically there's rules and regulations around how investments are done. And now that Bitcoin is available as an investment product through an ETF, any of these big financial managers or small financial managers can now legally invest in it, and they don't have to worry about it takes the risk away, I guess, so that they are now investing in BlackRock, and it's a BlackRock ETF, or Fidelity, and it's a Fidelity ETF. They wouldn't just be investing directly in Bitcoin. So it takes their risk and pretty much eliminates it and their responsibility, because if BlackRock or Fidelity or something were to go down, that would suck. But if they go down, I would suggest that the world is in serious trouble, and you're actually not that worried about your investments at that point, because there's probably no lights on and no bread to be found, you know? So what I'm saying is these, I hate that term, too big to fail, but these institutions are so big that they would never be allowed to fail, you know, simple as that. So your money or your investment is very safe in those situations. Having said that, it's not for everybody, and I do encourage people to do their own research and maybe consider self-custody. It's the best way to guarantee that you have your Bitcoin, so that if you ever need it, or you ever want to move, or if the rules in your country change, you want to get out of there, you control your Bitcoin. So there's pros and cons to both. We can certainly get into that in deeper discussion, but those investment vehicles, I think, allow hundreds of millions, if not billions of people to not only invest in it, but feel comfortable in investing in it, and can do so in a vehicle that they know and understand, which is, you know, mutual funds and ETFs and those types of things.
I mean, it seems like the ETF approval did drive the price upward, right, to this new all-time high. That's at least what at least many believe is the causation now for this. But on the other hand, what was also noticed that this, although it is considered a rally, a lot of people were writing about it and said, well, it's still not a hype. This is not actually the hype. So I don't know what it was. And I think now Bitcoin again has come down a little bit as we speak. Why is this now not a hype? Why is this a rally but not the hype? And is it because we're still expecting the hype to come after the halving, or what exactly is going on? Like, I think I read some articles that they looked at Google search results in terms of Bitcoin, and usually when you have a lot of people using Google to inform themselves about Bitcoin, then you know the hype is on. People are interested. They are involved. You could see that in the last rally.
Well, I think because Bitcoin has already been at 70,000 or close to it anyway at the last high, I think it was 69,000. To hit 70 or 72 or 74, I mean, if you're into Bitcoin, it's great. But if you're just a regular person, I don't think that's a big enough new high to generate interest. The other thing is I would suggest, and some people get mad at me for saying this, I actually don't believe it is a new all-time high, because I think we've had 20% inflation since the last all-time high. So I think it actually, for me, if it doesn't get to $85,000 or $90,000 US, then we haven't hit a new all-time high, inflation adjusted. Now, having said that, getting back to what you said, I think the hype is probably starting, because I saw last week that there were more Google searches for Bitcoin in the US than there was for Taylor Swift. So, and we can laugh about that, but the truth of the matter is, that's saying something, because Taylor Swift, I think, is one of, if not the most searched thing on the internet in the US on a weekly basis. So Bitcoin is certainly right up there with Taylor Swift in terms of Google searches, at least in the last week or so.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. But I do think, I believe Bitcoin will continue to go up. I think it's going to go up and down, but I do believe that it continues to work its way up. And I would suggest that, again, inflation adjusted, if we get to $85,000, $90,000 US Bitcoin, I think you're going to start seeing a lot of it mentions and discussions and articles in the mainstream media. You're already starting to see a little bit of it, but I think you'll see floods of it somebody said to me during the last run up, you knew Bitcoin was getting too expensive when people in coffee shops and Uber drivers were giving people financial advice on Bitcoin. So, we're nowhere near that yet.
Right.
And quite frankly, again, I think now because it's become much more institutionalized investment involved, I don't know that we're going to have that same type of hype. I think now it's going to be much more like a good stock or something like that as time goes on. Where I think before it was a little bit more Wild West. I'm not saying it was the Wild West, but it was a little bit more Wild West. But I think now, with all the big institutional investment coming in, literally billions of dollars every week, I think now it's a legitimate financial product.
Well, thanks a lot. I think that's a wonderful closing word for this segment. It's been great talking to you, and I hope we can continue the conversation. And yeah, well,
Yeah,
thanks a lot.
absolutely. Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, talk to you soon.